The Roman Republic might be described as an oligarchy with suppressed democratic tendencies. It was ruled by the rich and powerful, who usually belonged to well-established families. But every year, these proud magnates offered themselves the choice of the Roman people in some of history's most colorful elections. The Greek historian Polybius described the Roman constitution as a blend of monarchic, oligarchic, and democratic elements. Its leaders, the two consuls, had the kingly authority of leading armies and proposing legislation. The Senate, the all-powerful advisory council, provided aristocratic supervision over the affairs of state. The Roman people voted on laws and elected officials. Modern historians tend to interpret the Republic as essentially a power-sharing arrangement designed to allow members of prominent families to compete among themselves. Every office, from the consulship down, was held with colleagues and limited to one-year terms. Besides making it difficult for any individual to dominate the entire political system, these conventions guaranteed that ambitious men would have regular access to the offices that gave them authority and prestige. Besides the consuls, the Romans annually elected praetors, quaestors, and aediles, officials responsible, respectively, for the administration of justice, the supervision of state finances, and the maintenance of the city. By the late Republic, these were the steps of the Cursus honorum, the sequence of offices that culminated in the consulship. On a parallel path to power were the tribunes of the plebs, who had far-reaching authority potentially opposed to that of the other magistrates. Roman officials were elected by several popular assemblies. Consuls and praetors were chosen by the Comitia Centuriata, which was organized into 193 voting groups known as centuries. Early in Roman history, the centuries had been military units, levied in order of wealth. To the end of the Republic, they continued to be convened by property class and called in order from richest to poorest. Each century had a single vote, determined by the majority of its members' ballots. The wealthiest Romans were allocated dozens of centuries. The multitudes of the landless poor, by contrast, were only permitted one. The system was thus weighted in favor of the rich, whose votes effectively determined every election. The other important voting assembly was the Comitia Tributa, which chose quaestors and aediles. The same body, convened without the few patrician clans, appears to have selected the tribunes of the plebs. Here, Romans voted by tribe, a historical division based on the city region or rural district where they lived or from which they had originated. There were 35 tribes, 4 urban and the rest rural. In theory, this gave outlying areas outsized influence. A steady influx of rural registered immigrants into Rome, however, seems to have corrected the imbalance. Although the tribal assembly was not intrinsically biased toward the rich, only wealthy citizens were likely to travel to Rome from the rural districts to vote. Roman elections were not partisan. Voters were presented with a choice between politicians, not, normally, between dramatically different policies. During the late Republic, some men were described as Optimates or Populares, upholders of tradition or supporters of reform. These groupings, however, never approximated political parties, or even clearly defined political positions. They were nothing more or less than labels, indiscriminately applied. Elections were held in summer or early autumn. The date was announced by the presiding magistrate, traditionally 3 market days, that is, 3 8-day weeks, in advance. By then, most candidates had been campaigning for months. A letter supposedly written by Quintus Cicero, brother of the famous orator, offers advice on the process. The candidate, our word comes from the shining white toga candida worn by Roman office seekers, should spend time in the forum with a crowd of clients and supporters. He should greet citizens and shake hands. He should avoid talking about divisive issues and tell people what they want to hear. Whenever possible, he should smile. Some Romans were better at campaigning than others. When the haughty Publius Scipio Nasica was canvassing in the Forum, for example, he shook the calloused paw of a farmer and joked that the man must walk around on his hands. Bystanders, misinterpreting this as an insult, spread the word that Scipio had no respect for working men, and Scipio lost the election. Some candidates sponsored public entertainments and banquets to win support. The Roman people were as likely to punish stinginess as they were to reward generosity. One senator lost an election for praetor after it was remembered that he had presided over a banquet at which the seats were covered with rank goat skins, and the dishes were served in coarse clay pots. Though technically illegal, bribery of the electorate was rampant. Official hypocrisy in these matters could be breathtaking. One senator, accused of bribery in a consular election, secured his acquittal by bribing the prosecution. Then, as consul, he strengthened the penalties of the anti-bribery law. As the election approached, political graffiti went up all over Rome. To judge from the examples preserved at Pompeii, these were painted in bold black and red letters at intersections and along important streets. Usually, they proclaimed the support of a prominent individual or association for a candidate. This might be accompanied by a slogan, "An honest young man," or "worthy of public office," or by a gimmick, "Wake up and vote." More elaborate signs outlined campaign promises and even praised candidates in verse. Alongside the official signs painted by professionals, parodies appeared, in which runaway slaves or midnight drinkers advertised their endorsements. Speaking of endorsements, Romanis Magicae, a comic about a former legionary who stumbles upon a plot to destroy the Roman Empire, is back on Kickstarter for the third installment of its planned 4-issue series. After the events of the previous issue, the story's heroes find themselves in custody, framed for crimes against Rome. Meanwhile, the actual villains move closer to their goal of destroying the empire once and for all. The campaign is fully funded and is nearing its end with only a few days left, but there's still time to back the book as the plot races toward a final confrontation. Returning to our topic, and to a different kind of confrontation. On the day chosen for the election, if the auspices were favorable, the Roman people assembled to vote. Until the 2nd century BC, the process was public. Citizens simply stated the name of the candidate they supported to a polling officer who tallied the vote with a dot on a writing tablet. Later, the secret ballot was introduced. Each citizen carried a small wax tablet marked with the initials of his preferred candidate and dropped it into a vase or basket. Citizens received their tablets at the base of a narrow wooden platform known as the voting bridge. After making his mark, a voter walked up the bridge and deposited his ballot in the receptacle, which was elevated to discourage tampering. Election interference was a time-honored Roman tradition, which worsened amid the chaos of the late Republic. Unscrupulous candidates hired thugs to stand along the bridges and threaten voters. In extreme cases, they sent gangs to blockade the voting enclosure or hurl rocks at the assembled voters. Some elections were ended when mobs tore down the bridges and destroyed the ballot boxes. Other elections were invalidated by vote tampering. In one case, Cato the Younger noticed that a large number of voting tablets had the same handwriting. By the end of Cato's life, however, elections no longer mattered. Once he became dictator, Julius Caesar simply appointed his supporters to the offices they desired. Cicero joked that it was now harder to gain access to the council of a small town like Pompeii than it was to join the Roman Senate. Although Augustus campaigned in the traditional manner on behalf of his friends, it was an open secret that the careers of Rome's politicians were determined by his whim. Tiberius, finally, transferred elections to the Senate, ending the tumultuous half-millennium history of popular voting in ancient Rome. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like to watch my new series, Rome in Review, where I recently discussed the infamous movie Caligula, head over to my Patreon, which is linked on screen and in the description. Check the Toll & Stone Trips page, also linked in the description, for information about the tours that I lead to Rome, Greece, and other historical destinations. And if you just can't get enough Told in Stone content, scroll a bit further down for links to my other YouTube channels. Thanks for watching.